Bucharest, 1977. A scorching summer that was destined to be stained by the darkest nightmare of the communist era. Anca, an 18-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her, walks toward the train station and vanishes into the haze. 2 days later, the city wakes up in terror. Her body is found in pieces, scattered across the capital like a horrific puzzle. But the monster in this story isn't just the man who held the blade. Under the direct pressure of a dictator demanding an immediate arrest, the secret police birthed a different kind of beast. They chose an innocent man, a father, and threw him into the jaws of a torture machine that ripped a false confession out of his soul through blood and agony. While the true predator walked the streets as a free man, the system celebrated a victory built on lies. Tonight, we descend into the dust-covered files of a case that shattered a nation. A story of a sadistic killer, a corrupt regime, and a man whose life was crushed for a crime he never committed. This is the tragedy of Anca. This is the death of justice. This is the well of monsters. The case of Anca Maria Rodica Broscățean, often referred to simply as Anca case, is widely cited as the greatest judicial error in Romanian history. It is a story of a horrific murder, a state-sponsored frame-up, and a monster who was protected by the very system meant to catch him. Anca was a 19-year-old student from Sibiu who traveled to Bucharest in July 1977 to take her entrance exams for the Academy of Economic Studies. On the afternoon of July 6, 1977, she left her aunt's house to check the exam lists. She never returned. 2 days later, the city was plunged into terror. Packages containing her dismembered remains began appearing across Bucharest. The discovery of Anca's body is one of the most gruesome chapters in Romanian criminal history. It wasn't just a discovery, it was a macabre scavenger hunt that paralyzed the capital city for weeks. On July 8, 1977, 2 days after Anca disappeared, the first package was found. Over the following days, 19 different packages were discovered across Bucharest. The killer had deliberately placed them in high-traffic, iconic locations. Package 1, found near the Arch of Triumph. Package 2, discovered in a park, hidden under a bush near a popular walking path. The rest, found in trash cans near Colția Hospital, in public restrooms, and even left on tram seats. The remains were wrapped in newspapers and common plastic bags. Because the killer was a construction worker, the cuts were described by forensic doctors as surgical and chillingly precise, made with tools used for heavy labor. Because the case was handled with such political desperation, Anca's family was barely allowed to mourn. Her family had to identify her through the small pieces of jewelry Cosmosai hadn't managed to sell and through her distinctive student ID photo. She was eventually buried in her hometown of Sibiu. But for years, her grave was a place of controversy because the killer Samoilescu kept insisting he was innocent, meaning her soul, in the eyes of the religious community, could not rest while a lie was written in the court records. Under immense pressure to solve the case, the police targeted Gheorghe Samoilescu, a 26-year-old taxi driver. He was a simple family man with a wife and 3 children. His only crime was that he had a slight acquaintance with Anca's family and was known to the police as someone who didn't bow down easily to authority. Their evidence was flimsy. Samoilescu had reportedly been seen in the area and was known to have a temper. What followed was a nightmare of state brutality. Samoilescu was detained and tortured for months. The police beat him, kept him in freezing cells, and used psychological warfare until he finally signed a forced confession. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. While he sat in a cell, his life fell apart, his wife divorced him, his father committed suicide out of shame, and his health withered. In the eyes of General Gheorghe Samoilescu and the police, he was the perfect scapegoat. They needed a butcher, and they chose him. When Samoilescu refused to confess to a crime he didn't commit, the police turned the basement of the Internal Affairs building into a medieval dungeon. They tied his hands behind his back, looped a rope over a ceiling beam, and hoisted him up until his shoulders dislocated. While he hung there, they beat the soles of his feet with rubber truncheons, a practice called falaka. They forced him into a small wooden box where he couldn't sit or stand, leaving him there for days in his own filth. They told him his wife had already confessed to helping him and that his children would be sent to state orphanages where they would disappear. After months of this, broken and hallucinating, Samoilescu signed a stack of papers he hadn't even read. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. When the packages containing Anca's remains appeared, General Gheorghe Samoilescu and the police were under a death threat deadline from the Ceaușescu family. They didn't have time for DNA, which didn't exist then, or proper forensics. They looked at their files for anyone who had ever had a brush with the law or a disagreement with the victim's family. They found a tiny thread. Years earlier, Samoilescu had been in a minor dispute over some money with Anca's father. While Samoilescu was in the black hole of the prison system, his father, unable to bear the shame of his son being called the butcher of Bucharest, hanged himself. His wife was forced to divorce him to save her children from being persecuted by the Securitate. Samoilescu himself became a physical wreck, losing his teeth, his eyesight, and his mind. Anca Cosmic was not a snapped criminal, he was a methodical, cold-blooded predator who thrived on the invisibility provided by the chaotic urban landscape of 1970s Bucharest. While the police were busy torturing an innocent taxi driver, Anca was living a perfectly normal life, hiding a monstrous psychological profile behind the face of a simple worker. Anca was a house painter and construction worker. This was the perfect camouflage in communist Romania. He carried tools, knives, saws, and solvents that didn't look suspicious to anyone. He had access to private apartments and construction sites where screams would be ignored as work noise. He was described as unremarkable. He wasn't a brooding loner, he was the guy you'd see at the local pub or on the tram. This ordinariness allowed him to transport 19 packages of human remains across the city without a single person stopping him. Anca remained free for 3 years after Anca's murder. He didn't stop because he felt guilty, he stopped because he was satisfied for a time. But in 1980, the urge returned. He murdered another woman, Stana Puhuna, in a nearly identical fashion. However, by 1980, forensic techniques had slightly improved, and he left a trail that led back to his apartment. When he was arrested, the police didn't even ask about the Anca case, they thought that was solved. Anca was the one who brought it up. In a chilling display of arrogance, he began to correct the officers on the details of the 1977 murder. He laughed at the fact that they had the wrong guy, Samoilescu, and mocked the police for being so easily fooled. Unlike many killers who hide their victims to avoid capture, Anca displayed Anca. This suggests a narcissistic need for power. He didn't just dump the remains, he placed them. He enjoyed the fact that the entire police, and even the great leader Ceaușescu, were reacting to his handiwork. It is believed that Anca actually hung around the Arch of Triumph and Herastruhu Park to watch the discovery of the packages. He fed off the terror of the passers-by, watching the monsters in uniforms, the police, scramble in panic. In the 1980s, Romania still practiced the death penalty. Anca was sentenced to death for his crimes. He was executed by firing squad in 1981. But even in his final moments, he remained cold. He never expressed remorse for Anca, for his other victims, or for the man, Samoilescu, whose life he had helped destroy. When Anca Cosmic confessed in 1980 and Samoilescu was finally released in 1981, there was no parade. There was no apology. He walked out of prison to find that his father had hanged himself in the attic of their home, unable to live with the lie that his son was a murderer. His wife, under pressure from the Securitate, had divorced him and changed their children's names to protect them from the butcher's legacy. He lived the rest of his life in a tiny, crumbling apartment, coughing from the damage the prison cells had done to his lungs. Gheorghe Samoilescu's name is now synonymous with the Anca case, but not as a killer. He is the symbol of every innocent person crushed by a system that values order more than the truth. There is a dark rumor among old Bucharest investigators that Anca might have had more victims that were never officially linked to him. During the Anca years, several women went missing in the city and were never found. Because the police was so obsessed with closing cases to look efficient, they stopped looking for the missing once they had Samoilescu behind bars. In the Anca case, we see the most terrifying truth of the well: sometimes, the monster isn't the one holding the knife. Sometimes, the monster is the one holding the keys to the cell, the one who would rather destroy an innocent life than admit to a mistake. Because in a world that demands a culprit at any cost, the truth is just another body part left in the rain. Subscribe today. It's free, it's spooky, and unlike a 1970s interrogation room, we actually have snacks and decent lighting. See you at the bottom of the well.